Right, let's get some analysis on this. We're joined by trade and industrial policy strategist, senior economist, Dr. Neva Makgetla, who is, of course, looking at these numbers and certainly can give us some insight into what we are looking at. Dr. Makgetla, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. What's the best way and most, I suppose, beneficial way for us to look at these numbers? You've got the ruling ANC saying, well, we are seeing nearly 16.7 million people employed, surpassing the pre-pandemic employment levels. You've got opposition parties saying, well, this is actually the 14th quarter where we are reporting over 40% unemployment, still above that level. Of course, politicians have got particular things that they would want to look at to suit their political agenda. But this is about employment, this is about economy. So what would be a beneficial way of looking at it? The Statistician General saying 8th quarter gains in employment.
Yeah, I think the issue is the gains this quarter were very large. I should say that the data aren't seasonally adjusted. So they always tend to grow pretty well in the third and fourth quarter, and then we see slow growth or even losses in the first half of the year because of this seasonality, particularly obviously in agriculture and to some extent mining. Having said that, no, it's a very big jump. I think what's important is how long it's sustained. The bigger problem is that even with this kind of jump, what we're seeing is, and have seen since 94, is that employment grows with the GDP and the population, but apartheid left us with around 20% backlog in employment compared to other countries. So in South Africa, around 40% of the population says they're employed. In the rest of the world, it's closer to 60%. So the real issue is how do we get to that qualitative shift in employment? So these are good gains, but they're, these gains that go along with sort of normal growth are not good enough. We need a qualitative shift.
Yeah. Let's look at what's been driving the growth in terms of the sectors, right? Construction sector, 134 jobs. The ANC saying this shows economic reforms, citing 3 of those economic reforms that are seemingly boosting. That is the boosted infrastructure investment, new investment in rooftop solar systems, electricity-related investment. Are these sustainable? Are these going to be long-term job creators? Or is this just something that has been created now while we have an energy crisis, and these jobs are going to be gone tomorrow, I suppose, if one is to believe that things will turn around?
I mean, construction is always project-based. I think that those are very long-term trends with the energy transition. So I don't think those jobs, if it's genuinely because of the infrastructure and the higher investment, that would be around for quite a long time unless something goes, radically wrong with the investment program. One thing with construction is it's been depressed for a long time. So, that's a very rapid rate of growth for construction. That's a good sign.
And when we look at the financial sector, which by and large has been the main creator of jobs, barring the last quarter where they also saw a little bit of a dip, 450,000 jobs that have been created. What does it take for that particular sector to continue creating these kind of jobs? Others have said we should actually not be relying so much on this particular sector in terms of creating jobs.
Yeah, there's a problem there, and I'm glad you raised that because, in fact, it's not the financial sector. That's actually, they shorten it to financial sector in the reports, but it's actually business services and financial services. Most of it is business services. A lot of that, the fastest, most dynamic sector normally, but I haven't had a chance to look at these last quarter's numbers, is actually professional services. Then you have cleaning and security, which are very large, which are about half. And when I say professional services, it's like, accountants and lawyers and legal and all of engineers, digital, software, all of those things. And finance is only part of that. It's about 100,000 or so. So it's all the different business services, some of which are highly skilled, highly paid professional services, some of which are much lower level.
And if we were to see sustained growth levels in that particular sector, in the financial services sector, as you put it, in business services sector, what would need to happen?
I think it depends on what subsector grows. If we continue to grow the professional services, I think it's really good because it generates, if you look at the formal services, the median pay, security of tenure, all of that is almost as good as in manufacturing and as good as in the rest of the formal sector. So I think that, things that are building like engineering services and so on that directly serve the economy, things that build social capital, like also in the social services like health and education, these are actually really important things. And I think in the modern world, services have become more important, partially because that's what, as people's incomes go up, they want more services, but partially because services that used to be done within manufacturing companies and within households and also within other companies like farming and mining are now being done separately. And so they become a very important part of the economy.
Yeah. Why are we failing to reignite manufacturing, even though we are well aware and very clear that manufacturing is actually going to be the biggest driver of employment?
Well, first, I'm not sure it will be the biggest driver of employment in this country. The countries where manufacturing has generated employment on a mass scale have very different economic structures, and they've almost all been in Asia. So it's not particularly a common thing, but to the extent it's happened, it started with clothing and electronics assembly and moved on from there. And, we are very far behind other upper middle income countries when it comes to those kinds of light industries, yes, where you've gotten the big manufacturing-led export growth.
So this idea, for example, that others are saying we need to be putting up factories where, we are importing something as mundane as toothpick or as toilet paper. Saying we should be having factories that are manufacturing this stuff, and a whole lot of people are going to be employed.
Yeah, I think we should, but I think that in some cases, firstly, a lot of that stuff, if you look, is actually produced locally. Mostly what people, I think, are doing is looking at Asia and saying, why can't we just turn into Asia? But, they had a very different kind of colonialism. They had a much less mining-dependent economies. In many ways, we're much more like a petrostate where we have a few high-level extractive industries. And it turns out to be hard for a variety of reasons, which I don't think we totally understand, to get other things going at the same time. And then on top of that, what happened under apartheid, and I would argue a core reason why we have such high joblessness, is that African-owned, black-owned generally, but African-owned specifically, small business in both the rural and urban areas was destroyed and banned. And so we have this huge gap in self-employment in small business. So in other upper middle income countries, all of them, and then all of them even excluding China, around 20% of the population is self-employed. In this country, it's like 5%. And that explains a huge amount of that gap in employment I was talking about, where employment levels here are 20% lower than in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so I would argue that we really need to look at what was the legacy of apartheid in employment? What was it in terms of inequality, in terms of things like asset ownership, education, yes, access to markets, all of these things, and say, how do we address those things? And not just say we're only going to do one sector and somehow turn into China.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the areas that the ANC seems to be patting itself on the back around is the issue of access to higher education. Looking at the numbers, saying the number among graduates unemployed has been on the decrease since last year, sitting at 10.7%. Now it's sitting at 8.5%. So there is a decrease in unemployment around graduates, saying this is testament to the policies of increasing access to higher education, especially amongst the previously disadvantaged. But two, they are saying that there is an increase in a number of 15 to 24-year-olds who are in training of some sort. And they're saying young people are getting involved in training, some kind of in-service training, and this is a step in the right direction. What do you say?
Okay, well, having tertiary education, and especially a university degree, is the only thing that makes a really big difference in your job prospects. So it's a much bigger difference between having a tertiary degree, like, again, especially university, unemployment amongst university graduates is less than 5%. What you see is that from matric to having matric helps, but not nearly as much. The one thing I would say about the training is, yes, it's good that more people are in training. It's, we've got some very important training programs going, but it is a problem that we haven't fixed basic education, which is still profoundly unequal, depending if you're in a working class community or a rich community. even in the public sector. And I think that's a really big problem, that we are replicating inequality going forward by our failure to fix education, and ensure that people in, working class communities actually have good schools.
Yeah. Looking at that training, I mean, if we look at the 1 million jobs or so that would have been created in the last 12 months, social services accounting for 235,000 new jobs. Mostly they are saying this is through the presidential employment stimulus program, which really gets young people in some sort of administrative jobs, but at least they're beginning to work. And this, they're saying, has unlocked a couple of opportunities.
Actually, the biggest group are teachers' assistants. So it's actually a really important program. They're putting people with matric into classrooms to help, which is very important given that the learner-educator ratio in historically black schools is still twice as high as in historically white schools. So that's a very important way of not only giving those young people experience and a small income, but also addressing some of these educational inequalities that are still there.
And if we are to continue in that direction, we've created 1 million jobs this year, maybe 2 million jobs next year. There's a call for example, stabilizing the energy markets. What would need to happen there?
You mean like ESCOM? Or what do you mean by stabilizing the energy
market?
Well,
I suppose making sure that there's enough energy available, whether it's coming from ESCOM or it's coming from maybe even independent power producers, but just ensuring that there's enough energy.
Oh, totally. But I do think it's one of the things that's been extraordinary is the extent to which South Africans have managed to adjust to the problems with the national grid. And we've seen the economy grow despite them. And I think that has everything to do with, particularly businesses finding innovative solutions that have enabled them to keep producing even when they're being let down by the national grid. And I think that's an extraordinary success story.
Yeah. As for the mining, I mean, I spoke to a couple of guys on the mining. They are saying if we can solve the problems at Transnet, I'm sure mining would have done much better and they would have hired a little bit more people.
Firstly, by the way, the QLF's data on mining are not very reliable because it's very hard to do a survey. They say you should use the employer survey, which comes out 3 months later, unfortunately. But having said that, no, I think it's not just Transnet. There is a problem. The world prices were extremely high and they've now started to come down. So I think that we're going to, employment in mining does tend to be very sensitive to the global export price. So I wouldn't be surprised if mining doesn't do great. But there's no question that Transnet has been a backbone of the economy, and it's very important that also recovers.
Yeah. Overall, I mean, are we able, be it marginal growth, sustain these levels of growth going forward with the things that we are saying we will do, the reforms at Transnet, the energy availability factor being managed by the whole team there, the cluster of Ministry of Electricity, Department of Public Enterprises and the Mineral Resources Department as well. Some work being done in terms of making money available for students to be able to get education and as fast, be it challenged with whatever governance issues that they are dealing with. But if we maintain some of these policies in place, are they the kind of policies that will see us at least maintaining growth at 1 million jobs a year or maybe even more?
I think that if we fix ESCOM and Transnet, that would be critical. I do think that a concern is that the big cuts they're proposing in the budget will have a deflationary impact. And so we kind of hope that they will not go forward with those in quite as draconic cuts as they're currently proposing, because that would certainly slow down overall growth and that could have an impact on job creation. I mean, I just want to flag again, the jobs numbers are good, but they are not seasonally adjusted. So they're probably not quite as good as they look. Yeah? But it is good that, that we are seeing fairly steady jobs growth now since the pandemic, and the fact that it's recovered is very important.
All right, Dr. Makgetla, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on and your intervention here tonight. Senior economist, trade and industrial policy strategies, Dr. Neva Makgetla there.